Welcome to What Leaders Need Now, a podcast series focusing on today's leaders and what is expected of them. Hosted by executive coach, leadership facilitator, and author, Andrea Chilcote.
Hi, I'm Andrea Chilcote. Welcome to my leadership podcast, and thanks for tuning in. Those of you who know me know that I've used assessments extensively through my work as an executive coach and as a team facilitator. And they really set the foundation for that kind of work. We use a wide array of assessments depending upon people's outcomes. And some are deeply personal and people don't want to share them with anyone. And some can't wait to share them with their coworkers. What I know from my experience is the value is in the conversation, whether that conversation is with a coach, a coworker, or with the entire team. And the value in that conversation comes from personal insights and the insights that others get about you. Sometimes the assessments just validate what we already know about ourselves and help other people get to know us. But other times they reveal blind spots that people see in us that we don't necessarily see. What is certain is that use of assessments can help teams build trust and help individuals build trust among themselves. I am delighted today to have some guests here who I've worked with in the past using assessments. They've used assessments throughout their career, leadership assessments and personality assessments. And I'm thrilled that they offered to come and talk with you so that you can see their perspective and the outcomes that they've achieved. Sonji Jacobs and Chris Sizemore are the managing partners of INCISIVE, a strategic, data-driven communications, marketing, and public relations firm. And I'm going to read their bios. Sonji Jacobs has 30 years of communication strategy, media relations, reputation management, and public affairs experience. Prior to joining INCISIVE, she was Vice President of Corporate Communications at Cox Enterprises. She was Chief of Communications for the City of Atlanta and its mayor, and also a journalist for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and Miami Herald. Sonji earned her Bachelor of Arts cum laude in History and Literature from Harvard University and a Master of Science in Journalism from Columbia University. I'm so glad you're here, Sonji. Welcome.
Thank you, Andrea. It's a pleasure to be here.
Chris Sizemore founded INCISIVE in 2022, and prior to that, he was CEO of Creative Mischief, a digital agency based in Atlanta. He serves as chair of the Atlanta Fire Rescue Foundation and is a board member of Live Safe Resources, Emory University Center of Ethics, Fulton Education Foundation, and the Georgia Chamber, and several others. Chris was the recipient of the 2024 Atlanta Business Chronicle Leaders in Corporate Citizenship Award and is a Georgia Titan 100 CEO 2024 Hall of Fame inductee. Both he and Sonji were named to the Atlanta Business Chronicle and Georgia Trend 40 Under 40 lists. Chris, you're a busy man. We're honored to have you here with us.
Thank you.
Sonji, we've worked together over 10 years. I didn't go back and count how many years it's been. And I've seen you use assessments and use coaching to help grow yourself, help grow members of your team. And I've loved being part of that growth. Can you talk a little bit about the value that you found in using assessments, both personally and in growing your leadership?
Absolutely, Andrea. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I'm really glad that you actually have been an integral part of that leadership journey that I've been on. I do have to laugh. Both Chris and I think, got that 40 and under 40 award quite some time ago, but we keep it on there. But yeah, no, we've been on the career journey for a while, and I think one of the things that I realized when we started working together was just how important it was for me to learn as I began to manage more people and build a bigger team, to learn more about the impact that my personally had on others. And in the intro, I think you did a really good job of summarizing it. I think many of us at a certain point in our career have a sense, and both from our personal lives and personal interactions and being in the workplace, of how we think we show up. But I think one blind spot is the impact that it has on others. And in the workplace, as everywhere, perception is reality. So if people perceive you to be a certain way in the workplace, they're going to react to you in a like manner. And that can really end up being harmful to your career. And it also can lead to a lot of misunderstanding on teams. And that's not good when you're trying to build trust and really build a cohesive team culture. So the assessments really kind of opened up my eyes, not so much to some things that I guessed about myself, but more how I needed to show up as a leader and as a colleague to make sure that my drives weren't actually getting in the way of others and interfering with their ability to achieve and be their best selves.
Thank you for that. And I want to go back to something you said about the impact versus your intent. I call it the intent impact gap. Mm-hmm. Most people don't intend to be off-putting, to be silent, to be whatever it is somebody might say about their style. We think we're doing well, and we really don't know until we get that feedback from somebody else. And it helps to be able to pinpoint with the assessment what that is, what part of us that is. So thanks for raising that.
Yeah, specifically, I mean, every assessment I've ever taken, whether it's the Berkman or the DISC, I mean, I come off as very direct. And in some instances, that's really good. People sort of, they know where they stand. What you see is what you get. But in other instances, I had to learn that direct feedback, if I don't deliver it the right way, it can be really upsetting to someone, or my intent in being direct to give them the feedback is actually to help them. But in that moment, they may not receive it that way. Mm-hmm. So I had to really learn that the delivery, it's okay to be direct and to be yourself. The personality tests aren't asking you to be someone that you're not. They're not putting a judgment on who you are as a person. But it gives you the feedback that, when you're talking to someone, you may want to think about, as I said, the impact that direct feedback may have on them in terms of the delivery. So I found that to be really, really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more, maybe a little later on, about what you said about not changing your personality. It's emotional intelligence when we are flexible. That's one of the aspects of emotional intelligence. And we can use this information to say, where do I need to expand my comfort zone? And that can be really, really helpful. I want to get Chris's perspective on this, because Chris, you've also used assessments through your career. You during Leadership Georgia and other programs that you've been to. How has the feedback that you've gotten from assessments helped you grow personally?
So yeah, I've taken a number of them, and in Creative Mischief we use them as well, from the Strength Finders to the Colby. We used DISC and we did Berkman earlier. I think they're important for self-awareness. We use them in business standpoint. We use them to make sure we're putting people in the position to succeed and not putting in people in the position for them to do something the way we would do it ourselves. And a lot of times I think that's what happens. And so I've used the assessments that way. When I look at the assessments, no matter which one I've ever taken, they all pretty much are the same. There's some fluctuations based on the time of life or where I am in my life, and there's some fluctuations, but it pretty much is like it's been consistent. So it's more of a validation of who I am. But I've had a lifelong journey even before taking the assessments of trying to use a validation process in conversations to hear somebody else's perspectives. And that's been a validation when I see DISC assessments or when I see the Berkmans of how I interact with other individuals. So it's been a validation on thought process, but also a validation that we're all unique individuals. We may have the same goals, but the way we get there is going to be different. And no matter what position you're in, personal or professional, people are going to need to be placed in the position to be successful. And I think these give you that awareness, but it's still tricky. I I don't think the test truly defines somebody else. I think there's still the human aspect you need to understand of the emotional aspect of other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a couple things you said. I love the idea that you want somebody to be successful in the role, not do it the way necessarily you would do it. And that's really one of the reasons we use these, is to say this is just a style difference. This isn't a right or wrong thing. And I echo too, it's just a piece of paper or a screen that you're reading from, unless it comes alive. And I always tell people when I'm coaching that that's where I'm starting from. I don't get your data and say, oh, that's going on. Oh, there. Oh, yes, she's this way. I want to have a conversation with you. And we certainly can be flexible within our style. So I don't make judgments about people based on any aspect of their personality assessment.
I think that's probably the most important thing to understand about any assessment you take. That it's a start. It should be a starting point of a conversation, not the end point in the validation of what you feel about something. Yes. It's a starting point to understanding people, which I think that's ultimately, me personally, that's part of life's journey, is understanding other people and other perspectives. So I agree 100%. It's a starting point of the conversation.
And Chris, that's so reflective of who you are, the work you do. And I would even venture to say, and I want you to tell me if I'm misguided here, that is part of your value system. And
Absolutely.
Assessments don't measure your value system.
Correct. It is 100% part of my value system. I really tried, no matter what system you say, it's been called individualism, or I see empathy for other people, but I really try to see the good in other people, even if we disagree. That's part of my value system. Is like, I learn by trying to understand somebody who's completely opposite of me. And it doesn't mean they're wrong or I'm right, they're right. It's like, that's the perspective of trying to understand where they are. And it is to my core, my value system.
Mm-hmm. We need a lot more of that.
I would agree with that.
That's why Chris is a great business partner, because that isn't necessarily where I start the conversation, and that shows up in our personality test. So it's really good to have that balance as a team.
Well, I want to hear more about that, and I have a feeling we're going to have a chuckle or two as we talk about that. Shortly after you joined INCISIVE, you made a big investment of money and time in the organization in becoming a partner. And then you invested in doing this work with me, with Berkman assessments, and now you have DISC assessments, and, made that investment in the two of you being able to learn about each other and work together. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that has evolved?
Yeah, absolutely, Andrea. And we probably will laugh a little bit in this part of the conversation. So yeah, leaving my corporate job for over a decade was a huge step. A mutual friend had introduced me and Chris, and we realized that we had a lot in common in terms of how we thought about business, our passion for communications, for marketing, that we had many complementary skills. And we decided to take the big leap, and I joined his business. Immediately, though, after the work we had done, I think even before we signed the operating agreement, I said to Chris, I learned so much at Cox Enterprises, and one of the biggest takeaways I had in my career was growing as a leader, and I could not have done that without the coaching and the assessments and a lot of the work that I did. And I worked with this amazing person, Andrea Chilcote, and I think we, as we embark on this together, should do some of this work. And Chris said, yeah, I've taken some assessments. I don't know if it's going to teach me anything new. I don't want to misquote him, but we got there and we started working with you, and it was really helpful. Because I think as soon as we started working together full time, our personality differences, our style differences showed up right away. So one example, I think, and Chris, you can jump in here and correct me if I say anything that you don't agree with, is, Chris had been an entrepreneur for 14 years. He built a business. He had a certain way of doing things. And if you look at my, and Chris tends to be conscientious. He's really high thought. He'll take a look at something. He's completely right. He wants to see all different perspectives. So he's going to really kind of think something through. And if you take a look at my style, I'm part of, being direct. I think a corollary to that is I move fast. So I take a look at something and I'm like, okay, I've assessed it. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to change everything. So you can imagine right there within the first 3 months of us working together, that created some conflict. Sometimes I can be really impatient where Chris is actually super patient. So that was a good thing to help us work through that. But seeing that on paper, even though the paper doesn't mean everything, but actually being able to kind of see where we were based on the Berkman assessment we did at the time, and then talking with you about it was very, very helpful in terms of us talking and really kind of seeing what was motivating us. And you really kept emphasizing that we both wanted the same outcome, but we just had different ways of approaching the problem, and we had to kind of slow down to think through that.
Yeah, I would say to a few things. I was never against the Berkman, but to my process, I was like, it's not the end all be all, right? It's a thing to have a conversation on. And so that's why I was not so much hesitant to take it, but I wanted to align on expectations beforehand. Because I'm a big believer, I don't think assessment should be done in silos and then left to themselves. I think a third party is absolutely required because we will build our own biases. My belief is we'll build our own biases into what we think the assessment is saying to us or about someone else. So I always wanted to kind of set the expectation. But one of the things Sonji said was about, started an agency, ran for 14 years, had processes and stuff like that. For me, it was hard to understand until we actually started having the conversation with you is she valued those, but her way of learning was not using any of the processes that were there before, but just to go out and recreate her own. But she couldn't say that. She couldn't get that out. And it took time to get there of like, oh, okay, so you value that there's processes there. So if something goes wrong, you can fall back. But for you to do it, like you're just going to start from scratch. And once we actually understood that, and it took a minute to get there, then it was like, oh, okay, all right, well, now I know where we're going. And which, in a sense, is I learned by doing as well. Like I learned how to do all the process because I've built them. Or like if it's in my personal life, I love to fix things and make things, whether I've done it before or not. I can usually figure it out if I just use my hands. And so it was kind of the same process of it. So once I understood that's what she wanted to do, that it was like, hey, I value that, but I'm not going to use it. And I had to remove my personal feelings where you value it, but you don't even want to look at it. And so, human nature, like that doesn't make any sense. There's an imbalance there. But that's why I think it's important to have a third party there because as humans, male, female, doesn't matter, we'll say one thing and the other person is going to hear something else based on the mindset that they're in at that moment. And the third party, just like any therapist, is going to say, what I heard was this. And the other person say, all right, my context behind it was this. And that's my thought process that I always go in my head, which I know drives Sonji nuts at times. And that's why there was hesitant to go into it because I wanted to align on here's the way I look at these things. I think the paper is great, but it's that third-party evaluation, the quote-unquote coach or therapist that can help walk you through it so we don't build our own biases into what we think the words on paper are saying.
Well, Chris, I love that you've just given an endorsement to coaching because, and to therapy. I'm not a therapist, but for all the therapists out there, it's very helpful as well. I love that you are finding value in that. And what you're demonstrating is that we can know something about ourselves. Sonji didn't learn that for the first time in our conversations, that she was like to change things and like to go get them and like to do it fast. But she got to apply that to the processes. And this is where we have blind spots and we don't realize what impact we're having, even though she had good intent. And now that she had good intent. Through a lot of conversations. I don't know, Sonji, if you want to respond to what Chris said.
No, I think, that was something that we worked through early on. It made me think about another thing that I don't know if I actually fully realized. on all of my assessments, it'll show that even though I like to go fast and get things done and I like results, I'm actually pretty team oriented. And Chris is as well, but it seems like, he's more comfortable working independently for longer periods of time than I am. And I think initially we thought that we were really, really in the same place on that. And it became clear that there was, even though it was a subtle difference, there was a difference. And I think because, I had been in a huge company for a decade, that's a long time. And this was such a big transition for me. In those first few months, I didn't realize what that impact would actually be, kind of leaving this team behind. I think there were moments where I thought, gosh, I'm tired of managing all of these people. This will be great. I'll wake up, I'll work in my pajamas. And about a month into it, it didn't take long. I definitely felt the impact of that change. And Chris was like, well, my usual work style is I get up, I do what I need to do. And then I what would he say? I lock in and I get stuff done that's on my list. And after a few weeks of this, I was like, hey, I'm over here. Like, it's me and you running this business. I need to see you. And so we had to have a lot of conversations about that. And then we ended up actually setting aside time to work together. And I think that Chris became really kind of receptive and even realized, hey, actually, this is great. The brainstorming, the in-person sessions, I actually get a huge benefit. I don't want to speak for you, but I think you began to really see how valuable they were. And you realize that, yes, you may be more comfortable, even though you do like being with people, you're more comfortable with independent time, but that we could find that balance. But that took a few months to hit that sweet spot.
It's a combination. So I think teamwork is extremely important, and I thrive off thought partnership, but I also thrive off trust. And I think there's certain work, at least the way Sonji will say, I'll go down rabbit holes, but what I'm really, really, really good at is connecting dots that others don't see. And to do that and to bring information together, that's when I lock in to do that style of thinking, because those dots are other people's perspectives that I'm trying to build into whatever we're doing. And so when I say I lock in, it's me wanting to get in and focus on some stuff, or focus on some operational stuff that's just like remedial, you need to get out of the way. But it's also saying I trust the team. Like, I've given them, here's what we need to do, here's what the actions need to take place. Because if it's the old firm, designers or developers or stuff like that, the collaboration is our collaboration meeting. We get together, we go through stuff, and then they lock in and get to dig into what they want to do. So what I realized is it was a combination that I'd been in this environment for 14 plus years. Sonji's coming from corporate, where there's people everywhere every day, even when Creative Mischief had an office, that I just needed to, and she'll maybe laugh or roll her eyes, we would go over a weekly agenda and be like, hey, here's the stuff. What I did to help with that is I prioritized the stuff that was on, she needed my assistance with first, and then I would put my stuff after that. So the collaboration was going to be up front, so she would be able to get that collaboration. And even when we do that, she would still just zoom out of nowhere and be like, hey, I had a thought, can we do this really quick? And I would move stuff around and do it. And it took time for her to realize that there was a somewhat of a negative impact on me because I was moving things around, but it was me realizing how important that human connection of the teamwork was, and reprioritizing and doing that, because I'd become so used to, after 14 years of agency life, of having the ability to, we have the team collaboration meetings, we're going, and then once we send everybody off on their tasks, they go, and then we have check-in meetings, because everybody was plugging in and digging in and do stuff. And you may have side meetings and stuff like that, but that's ended up what it was. It's not like I don't like teamwork, but there's certain stuff where it's I just want to focus, right, to see the perspectives that are out there.
So
it sounds so logical and it makes sense. I know everybody's listening okay, that makes sense. But, it actually, for us to hit the right rhythm for us in the work that we're doing and in our business partnership, it actually took, because it sounds like we're saying the same thing, right? You do a little teamwork, then you go off on your own, but it didn't actually kind of play out that way until we went through the coaching and kind of understood the different perspectives. What are you going to say?
I think the reality is the silence of a house, because, working out of your house, for me, fine. I could have 15 different things on the background music, but if I'm plugged in, and I'm working. I think for Sonji, it's just like, all right, I hear birds chirping, my cat's walking around. All right, no. And so then we adjusted. Because we don't have an office, because everybody's remote, we would find times to meet at a location to do brainstorming sessions, or we do more Zoom sessions to just do business stuff or work on a project together. So,
Yeah,
So
that made a huge difference for me.
none of this sounds easy because it really is. We always say it's simple, not easy. It's not easy to change. And because you're driven by real needs. So you have real needs. You have a real need, Chris, to concentrate and connect the dots. Sonji has a real need for connection. And what I hear you did is you compromised, you were flexible and gave each other what they needed. You didn't hold back your needs. You just asked your partners to give you what you needed to be successful and needed to be able to work. And that is emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence, I did a 4-part video series just recently on emotional intelligence. And the simple structure is self-awareness. I know who I am and what I need and how I show up. Other awareness, I can pay attention. The thing that you're so good at, Chris, is I can pay attention and pick up what the other person needs. Behavioral flexibility to be able to shift my behavior when it's needed. And then relationship management is what happens when we put all of that together. And you also just took an emotional intelligence assessment, the Agile EQ, which is part of the DISC Catalyst suite. So now you have all that data to play with. That's new, but you're going to be able to have some fun with that. I have no doubt.
We'll be calling you.
Good.
I think part of it also is recognizing when you have these tools and with the disc and others, it's recognizing your boss or your direct report or your colleagues may have a different style, but shifting your view to seeing that as an asset and how that benefits the whole team it's really interesting when you start to see other team members. Like Chris and I have been sort of laughing. We have 2 team members. They're both so super talented, but they actually also work really differently. One needs immediate feedback, and he thrives when he gets that, and that pushes him and motivates him to do even more work. And then he turns something in and he's excited about it. So he needs that sort of motivation to keep him going. We have another person on our team, also just so super talented, but Chris and I laugh. She's kind of a little bit even more than Chris in that mold, where she gets her assignment and then Chris and I are like, wait, where did she go? I mean, she goes off and she's locked in. She's doing the work. She doesn't ask any questions. She doesn't need any feedback. And then she delivers something wonderful. But it's just really interesting to kind of see when you're building a team and managing a team, how different people work. And as the manager, sort of leaning in and supporting our people so that they're able to thrive, which Chris said earlier. And I think for me, I also came to value initially where I was like, oh my gosh, Chris is going off. He's going into the rabbit hole. But now one of the things that I really value in the partnership is how conscientious and how thorough he is. So we're working on a big project for a client right now. I mean, and Chris is killing it because it's really detailed, wonky policy stuff. And about halfway through, I'm kind of glazing over, ready to move on to the next thing. And Chris is digging all the way in, doing amazing work. So I found that we can really, I've come to really appreciate that. And I can see how it makes our business partnership stronger.
I wish every leader could experience the value of what you're describing and the openness to knowing that everybody has different strengths and different needs, and how that makes the team better. That's what we talk about diversity on a team. That's diversity on a team. And it makes the team better when you have that and everybody's not, all thinking the same. What advice for both of you, I would ask both of you this question, what advice would you give other leaders, especially people leaders, people in positions that have to work closely together, influence one another, on how to use coaching and assessments?
I would say that all of us are perfectly imperfect, that there's going to be imperfections, and that's good, because that's what you talked about, diversity of thought. Like, surround yourself with people that think differently than you, that have a different perspective of you, and that's going to allow you to grow and to see things that you've never seen before. Life is about growth, always and always. And I think that's really important for leaders to know. But that emotional aspect, get to know your people, understand what makes them tick. Of all the people we ever hired at Creative Mischief, by the time I interviewed them, it was all about who they are, what motivates them personally, who they want to be, that type of stuff. Once they came on, we did the assessments. We had a third-party person come in and talk about them. But it was very clear, like, this is to help us understand each other and how we function, but we know it's not the end-all, be-all. We know things are adjust, they're come up, but we all have to have the ability, including leaders, to adjust at times. And if you're somewhere where that leader can't adjust or move, it may not be the right place for you. I mean, I know there's some really, really, really successful companies around here, especially in Georgia. And the CEO tell you this is a dictatorship. It's either my way or the highway. And they are very, very successful. And if you love that environment, you thrive in that environment, it's going to be great for it. But if it's not, look for somewhere else. Be happy at what you do. But I think the biggest thing for all leaders is we are all perfectly imperfect.
Yeah, I would add on, Chris, to what you said. I really think as I've grown as a manager and a leader, I think earlier in my career, I was, probably more likely to think if someone wasn't succeeding, it was because of something that they weren't doing right. And as I began to progress and learn more and develop myself, I definitely think that the biggest thing that, a leader can do is what you said. It's really putting people in places where they can succeed, right? Because I think that, 9 times out of 10, there's always a case where something may not be the right fit. That does happen. But a lot of times as a leader, you have the ability to kind of assess where someone is and put them in a place where they can really kind of show their talents based on their work style, based on, what they're interested in, what motivates them. And we've seen that, and we do a lot of that kind of work with when we're thinking about building teams to serve our clients. So we have a number of clients across different industries, whether it's corporate or nonprofit or government. And we'll take a look at the different talent and interests of our team members and be really thoughtful in terms of, what client account we put them on, because we realize that, we have team members who will show up and succeed and get into that work more than others. And that's something that I think we really enjoy doing. In fact, Chris and I do that ourselves also. I mean, even at our level as the owners of the company, we love all of our clients, but there are just certain clients where one of us may have a strength or a passion that's a better fit.
That's absolutely, I love that advice. And we also have, I don't know if the two of you are aware of this, we have a hiring instrument, the PXT Select. It's a hiring and developing instrument. And, some leaders go as far as to use instruments like that to assess fit even during the interviewing process. And the purpose of that one is to help you ask the right questions. It's not to eliminate somebody because of what you see on the assessment. It's to be able to check in on things and say, how have you handled this in the past, given who you are and given your style? So I love that you're using that kind of an approach in assigning work. I can't thank both of you enough for being here, for being my client and doing this work together. It's a joyful experience to work with the two of you. And I know that other leaders will benefit from the insights that you shared here with us today. And I also want to thank our listeners and viewers. Be sure to like and subscribe to my podcast on YouTube. Look for me on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in any of the coaching or assessments that we talked about here today, you can email me at andrea@morningstarventures.com. And to all of the leaders out there, never stop learning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been an episode of the What Leaders Need Now podcast series with Andrea Chilcote. You can find this and other episodes on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for listening.